Okay, hello, welcome back. djvicvapor with you. Bitwig Studio Phase-4, and in this tutorial or this lesson within the Phase-4 course, we're going to talk about the parameters. So something exciting to talk about, right? So of course we already can see that these four squares are our oscillators per se. And you can see they're all identical. Each one has the same set of parameters or same set of features. So there would be no need for me to go over it, 4 times. So we'll stay focused on our red oscillator 1, and we'll just kind of go down the list here and talk about the different parameters and the understanding of how they can help us shape our sound within our sound design and within our concept of using the Phase-4. So the first thing we see is R, which stands for the R for red, telling us that's the oscillator we have. And next you see this little 0 with like a degrees button and or degrees insignia. And what that is, what this 0 and this degrees is it's allowing us to change the position of the start of the form, whatever waveform we're using. We discussed in one of the other lessons, the start point is here, and then it cycles down and over and ends right here. But by using this percentage number, we can begin to change that, where that starts. And I'm just going to hold down this key here and play, and you can see how now I can move it left and right and change the start position. Like if I wanted it to start, in a slightly different position. So that is, let me get this guy, double click, just push 0, get it back to 0. So that is changing the start position or the start section of the waveform or the cycle. So let's move on here. This, of course, is telling us what waveform we're using. Just by going up and down here, it gives us our different waveforms. Currently, we're under a sine, S-I-N. And then the number 1 is the formants, introducing formants. And we kind of went over that before in one of the other tutorials, but this is just a way to introduce formants to our waveform. Now, moving over here, looking at what's called the ratio, you got to think of this in more mathematical terms, and I'm not talking about Einstein mathematical terms. It's pretty straightforward, but you've got some good basic mathematical concepts in your mind there. This should work out pretty well for you. So number 1 is just doubling, tripling, or quadrupling the cycle or the waveform. So when it's 1-to-1, it's exactly the frequency that we should be hearing according to whatever key or whatever note we're playing. It's true to that note. It's exactly that frequency. But what happens is if you take number 1, you start to move it up. Now it's doubled, essentially going up an octave, triple, quadruple. So this is just, adding harmonics to the waveform. That's what 1 does, double, triple, quadruples. Now the second one is more of a division. So you got to think of it as dividing it either in half or dividing it, further down. So see, now it's getting lower and slower. It's because we're dividing instead of doubling. So the first one double, triples, it adds, and the second one divides. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Moving on, we've got the key tracking and we've got semitones. So we could essentially, if we wanted to, we could turn off key tracking and just dial in exact number of semitones that we want. And essentially, currently as this oscillator is set up, it's going to follow. It's going to follow whatever note I'm pushing and go up higher and lower in pitch accordingly to wherever I'm at on the keyboard. So if you turn key tracking off, you can just kind of say, I want specifically this number of semitones to be fixed. In other words, it won't key track, it won't follow wherever you're playing the notes. It won't follow that. It'll stay at a fixed position. And one of the cool ways you can think about that within sound design is if we go over here to oscillator B for a second and say turn it off, turn key tracking off, and let's say we'll dial up just a random number here, like 50 hertz or so. Now we've got oscillator B fixed independently of all the other oscillators, which are already set to key track. So these other oscillators, we're not hearing them, but if I would have them turned up, they would be following whatever key I'm pushing on the keyboard. But oscillator B would stay at a fixed rate. So what would make that cool is if we're going to use it as a modulation source, and it's going to be fixed to one specific area. So I can dial up B here and then adjust it within the modulation. And now you can see that we're modulating this form exactly at that rate, at that fixed rate. And no matter where I'm at on the key now, that modulation stays fixed. It doesn't change. It doesn't key track. So it can be very creative and very instrumental, like in creating maybe some really unique sweeps or big ethereal like drones or something like that. So just something to consider when you're looking at key tracking. You can really come up with some really unique ways to use it. It doesn't always have to be following wherever your notes are within the key. So I double click these to get them back to their default areas. I'm going to pull the mod down. So we've gone through those. Let's look at this guy over here. So this is our detuning essentially. Now we can do it with the first one selected. We can do it, identical. We can be detuning the oscillator, the left and right essentially at the same time together, dependently. But the second one allows us to detune and create a wider stereo field, detuning the left and right independent of each other. And hopefully, I don't know if you've got good speakers in front of you or headphones, but you can probably hear that change. Essentially, it's just a nice way to add stereo width to your sound design. And then we've talked about already the shape is going to be our phase distortion. And then secondly, we've got our phase modulation, which isn't going to do anything because I don't have anything assigned. And then these individual 4 modulators are just dialing up what other oscillator we want to use as a modulation source. And then you've got, finally here, you got your speaker. This little arrow guy between our phase distortion and our phase modulation, if you click that, it's just a nice way to reverse the process. So now we can introduce the phase modulation in front of the distortion. And that's all those parameters and all those different concepts are available, like I said at the beginning here, in all 4 of these. So everything we talked about here applies to all these. So hopefully it kind of gets your brain turning a little bit to start to understand how you can really dig into this guy and make some really unique and fun sounds. Let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson.